Yeah, I think it's when you said the word strategy, right? I think unless it's a case study, one was this thing about influencing the influencers. So as a PM, I
Yeah.
think you have a lot of influence on your cross-functional team challenge where the interviewer is bringing to you a specific situation and you need to solve it on the spot. So for me, the transition was pretty quick. I remember there was a Friday where I was a software engineer, and on the Monday I was a PM.
Hey everyone, welcome to yet another episode of Learning Curve podcast. So today we have John, who is a director of product management at Metamap. John comes with a decade of experience in the industry. I'm super excited to talk to John today, and I think you will have a ton of insights to take back today. So welcome to the show once again, John.
Thanks. Looking forward to being here and sharing some of my thoughts.
Awesome, awesome. So why don't we get started with a little bit about your journey, John? So can you start on like how you actually figured out that you want to be a product manager? Like, can you talk a little bit about your journey, maybe from your starting days? I think everybody would love to hear that whole decade of experience that you bring onto the table.
All right, let me take you back to the beginning. So, I started my career actually studying computer engineering from the University of Waterloo, and I started my career, my first job as a software engineer.
Mhm.
The first company I worked for was a consulting company building mobile and web applications for Fortune 500 companies. And then after that, I moved on into another product role in engineering, focused on building investment products for millennials. And from there, I transitioned to my first role as a PM.
Okay, okay. So how did you figure out, John, like product management is a career that you want to pursue, right? Like what was that trigger point? I think like there's one question like I like personally asked myself and like a lot of my people who join this show, right? Like I would love to hear your story on like how what was the trigger point for you, John?
So, I mean, looking back, I think I always was meant to be a PM. So, if I look back at that first job, the consulting role, um, it typically would involve requirement gathering, working with a team of engineers, designers, and QAs to build and launch new products. But then, after a number of successful product launches, I felt something was missing.
Mhm.
So, me and the team got really good at developing products. But what I personally missed out was that human interaction, the interaction with the end customers, and seeing how they loved my products or didn't love my products. And I wanted to explore this area.
Yeah.
So that's why I actually switched from a company that builds product for other companies to an early stage startup that builds their own products. And then it's really true that at a startup, you get the opportunity to wear many hats. And I agree 100% with that statement.
Mm.
I found when I was in that role, compared to some of my engineering peers, I did find myself in scenarios where I would be going out, speaking to customers, running A/B test experiments, and then even working as a project manager when we hired a third-party software consulting firm to work on a portion of the app. All of these are probably normal tasks that a PM might take. So in that role at that time, I started asking myself this question: if instead of doing this for 30% of my time, what if I did this for 100% of my time? And
Uh-huh.
that's when I really decided it was time to switch into PM.
So how was that journey like? Right. For example, you said that like you understood that you want to move this into like a full time career, like PMing, right? So what are all the things you did to get into product management? That like especially that first role, right? Like because that's the most tough part in most of the scenarios, right? So like what was your specific journey? Like how was it like?
Yep. So I really think it's a combination of two things, right? So I think oftentimes PMs come from many different disciplines, and I personally think there's a, a combination of you need to do the task of the PM role that you want in your existing role.
Okay.
So, like I mentioned, I probably was spending about 30% of my time already doing PM related tasks. Um, and actually, at the time,
Mm-hmm.
product at an early stage didn't exist in the organization. The founders were the ones who were formally doing the role. So I actually didn't have an opportunity in my current organization to do it.
Yeah.
But what I did next was from my earlier experiences and just working and with clients, working with other PMs, I found this opportunity with one of my old clients that I previously built an Apple Watch app for. And I was able to speak to them and land a role as a PM. So for me, the transition was pretty quick. I remember there was a Friday where I was a software engineer, and on the Monday I was a PM.
Oh, okay, okay. So you leverage your one of your past clients. You took that referral or maybe like that network to get into product management, if I understand it correctly. Awesome.
Yeah, I would say it's a combination of both the network, but also your working relation, right?
Ah,
I think
yes, yes, yeah,
people work generally want to work with great people, and I think the way I worked with them, even though it was a different role, really resonated with them,
yeah.
which is why they believed that I would be able to make the transition without too much issues, which I think I did.
For sure, for sure. I think like especially product management is a very high ownership role, right? Like, and it always works on the trust factor. So yeah, great to hear that story, John. So can you tell me about like what happened after that, right? Like, so like how did you end up in your current role as a director? Can you talk a little bit more about those journey? Like I know like personally I know you from the Food Panda days. I would love to know the whole journey, right? A bit more deeper to for maybe like for our viewers to understand, right? Like what happened after that, and how did you end up in this role currently as a director of product
Yeah.
management?
So many years later, after building my product experience through a variety of different companies,
Mhm.
I was working at consumer electronics at Ecobee, food delivery at Food Panda, job recruitment at my own
Mhm.
startup. I joined a company
Yeah.
called Metamap as just an individual contributor, as a product lead, working on new product vertical. And I think through finding success in that product, I was later promoted. So today I'm a director of product,
Mhm.
and I manage two different product departments. One of them is the overall platform, from the APIs, the SDKs to the merchant portal, and I still overall manage this separate product vertical called financial data.
Hmm. So what was the biggest difference when you were working as an ICPM, right? In like your previous roles to like being a director of product management. What is the major difference that you're facing, and personally, do you enjoy that a lot? And was it like your plan to move into such a kind of role? Would love to know your thoughts on that. Like, yeah,
Yeah, I think the transition was a natural one for me. Working as a team of one, working on a new product vertical, there's a certain speed and scope that you can cover.
yeah.
And in order to move faster, I think you do need to grow a team around it. So I think it was sort of as a result of our product moving quickly and the organization wanting this product to succeed and move further. So I think it was a natural sort of progression for me.
Mm-hmm.
Now I would say, being in the role for over a year now, it is a different job.
Mm.
So the job of a PM and a product leader are quite different.
Okay.
Maybe some of the things that I noticed that are different about it is the time horizons is one.
Mm.
So in the past, as a product manager, I would be looking a week out in terms of sprints, maybe a quarter out in terms of quarterly planning. But in my role today, I'm looking out 1 year, 2 years.
Yeah.
And when you're looking out that far, the way to do it is a little bit different, right? Customers aren't telling you about their problems that they want 1 year from now. Founders aren't telling you this. So I think there's definitely less signals, and you have to look towards the market, seeing where the market moves, where the market trends, and looking at a big picture of the company and seeing where you can succeed. I think that's one big difference. Maybe that's another one.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because your entire skill set that you started now using, right? Like in terms of envisioning that whole product would have also started shifting, right? Like, yeah, that's a very interesting point. Do you want to elaborate it more on it, or like I think you're, uh,
I was gonna, yeah, two other I think
yeah,
differences that I noticed. One was this thing about influencing the influencers. So as a PM, I
yeah,
think you have a lot of influence on your cross-functional team and the overall products that you build.
hmm,
I think now it's about how do you influence
yeah.
people with that mindset, right? That want to be very creative, want to sort of solve the problems on their own, and how, as a product leader, do you support them on that journey, giving them the right tools to be successful, as well as the right constraints, so that they're
Hmm.
building in the sort of correct direction.
Awesome, awesome. Let's shift gears a bit now, John. So I think in your case, you have been an IC role, you have been like being a lead, and then you are a director of product currently, right? So, what is exactly like product management for you, right? Like, I think you would have seen it from different perspectives also, like as you were saying it before, right? But like, is there any common thread like across all these different roles which you played? And like, I would like to know like how your thoughts have evolved of this word like product management, like when you were in different roles, or like is it like the same, right? Like when you were in different roles. I just want to know your thoughts
Yeah.
on that.
So at the end of the day, I mean, if we were to break it down, I do think it's really just about solving customer problems, no matter which level you're at.
Hmm.
And I think it's important that there's the same definition because really it's one team, right? It's not
Yeah.
different people doing different things. We're all sort of working towards the same goal. I think
Hmm.
the tools you have and the impact that you have is slightly different at each of the different levels. So I would say overall, it's about having
Yeah.
these three phases of product management from discovery, really understanding customers deeply, understanding their pain points and how they solve problems today.
Hmm.
There's development aspect where there's a variety of different
Yeah.
types of cross-functional teams that you could work with depending on the product that you're building. Or if you're a product leader, you're working with a team of PMs, for example. And then finally, the go-to-market. At the end of the day, it's really everyone's job to get the products that you're building in front of the customers. So
Yeah.
um, I would say those are the three, and there are definitely common elements between the different roles.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. And what do you think like is the what do you say like the main traits of a great product manager, right? So you would have seen a lot of different product manager. Like I think you are originally from Canada, right? And you have moved countries. You have seen people from across the world, different kinds of product leaders. Is there any common thread or things that you have seen in great product leaders, right? Any traits you want to share with the audience?
Yeah. So I would say that there are probably two things that I've noticed. Is one is called it's a superpower, and then there's the traits.
Yeah,
Superpower, I would say, is sort of your background, your experience, right? So, like you touched, the location you come from, that is a superpower, and it either helps you or makes your current job harder. Your the domain or discipline. So whether you maybe were a former engineer, a former marketer, former support people, that's a lot of skills that you've developed that are really relevant for the PM job.
mm,
But maybe there's three attributes or traits that I would say.
mm,
The first one I would say is deeply curious. I
mm,
think it's very important to care a lot about the customer and
yeah,
the products that you build,
yeah,
understanding really who they are, what solutions they've solved, and just continue to ask why. And then why should your product succeed?
yeah,
What could you do to make your product better? So that's the first one. The second one I would say is, of course, collaborative. In the worlds we live today, products aren't built by one person alone.
yeah,
So I think there is a huge aspect about how do you unlock the skill set from the team you're working with, right? That's really how you can build really great products that maximize the skill sets of everyone.
yeah.
And then I would say the last one is resiliency. I think there was a stat somewhere that actually most product features and launches fail actually in
Yeah,
terms of the first launch.
yeah, that's
It's
reality.
not fail in terms of doesn't meet the expectations that maybe the team set out for themselves. So I think you need the resiliency to continue to go further, right? What would version 2 look like? What would version 3 look like? And that's only through hard work of really continuing to listen to the feedback of users, continuing to experiment and try new things. But I think you can't ever give up, and you need to keep growing both your own skills as well as the skills of the team, so that you can build the best product for that set of customers.
Yeah, that's interesting. And John, I think you have had like a pretty amazing career, right? So I think almost a decade of experience, and you have transitioned within multiple roles. As we spoke earlier, currently you are in a director of product management position. So I would like to know, like, hey, what is your secret, right, in terms of how do you upskill yourself, right, like daily towards this whole game, right, like especially from a professional standpoint of view, right? Like, what is your mantra or like the formula for it? I would love to hear that.
Yep. So I think the common trait, if I look back through my experiences and even how I spent my time in these experiences, I think it's really about surrounding myself and learning from an amazing cross-functional team.
Hmm.
I'm learning every single day by just watching how peers solve problems, how they think through problems, and how they ask questions themselves.
Mm,
And it doesn't matter whether it's a junior engineer who just joined the team, or it's even the stakeholder that I work with. I'm always observing and learning and seeing how they decide to do certain things or don't decide to do certain things.
Yeah.
And I also have the opportunity to ask them. So I would say that's important. You always have to have, maybe it's like a growth mindset, that you take every opportunity that you have as a learning opportunity. And it's not just about doing the task and just moving on, coming back home, but really like taking that maybe a few minutes while you're doing the task to like step back and just see, even evaluate yourself. How did I do on this presentation, this
Yeah.
PRD, this documentation, and just continue to improve. So I do try to hopefully improve 1% every day or
Yeah, I actually like when you told this, John. I remember the times when we were working in Foodpanda. I used to consciously go to people, maybe plan a lunch session with them, had a discussion with them, right? I think that's one of the unique things I've seen in you, right? Like not everybody does that, right? So, do you have any such systems that you follow, right? Like within your day to day, hey, like let me go and meet some new people today, let me go and discuss with them, right? Like do you have any, was it consciously planned, or do you have such kind of systems that you keep, right? Like let's say, hey, morning, let me read for 10 minutes, right? Like every day, right? Do you do such systems consciously? Like I would like to know a bit more on this, because this is one of my favorite topics in this entire show. So yeah, I would love to know your thoughts on it. Like how do you upskill, think about systems to like learn continuously?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. I don't think I've set like a KPI for myself to say I need X meetings per day, for example,
Yeah.
but I think it's really about solving problems, right? So oftentimes, if you've seen
Mm.
my career, I end up working on new domains that I've never worked on before, right?
Mm.
Um, and the only way I'm able to quickly adapt to that domain is by getting really good at solving problems. So whether I'm in a company, I think the best people to learn from our peers. So maybe during those lunches we had, I might be bringing up some problems that I'm actually working on and really, really genuinely want to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, maybe there's experiences that I've had done from before where I can help solve your problems. So I looked at sort of, let's say, networking or collaborating with peers as a just a mutually beneficial way to just learn and solve problems.
Yeah.
So that's how I did it. But I would say the personal life is important, right? So finding that right balance between personal life and career, I think, is important as well.
Yeah.
So there may be periods where I would be a little bit more collaborative because I had a clear a clear mind of thought at home, for example, or times when it's left. So definitely, I think it's just about finding the right system that works for your life stage at the given time. I think that's super important as well. And I think only you are the person that would be able to know what's best for you. And I think it's good to have one to continue to grow, but don't overdo it.
That's very interesting, John. I think that perspectives gives everybody a fresh this thing, right? So I think like there are a lot of people who come with a, hey, like follow this system, right? But ultimately at the end of the day, you need to know like what are your priorities, right? Like what will work for you, right? Like you need to customize for it, right? Like your learning plan. But you should never let's say stop from learning also, right? Like that's a good point. So is there any points, like what I want to know next from you, John, is there anything that you are actively like deep diving into these days, right? Like any new fields, technology, or let's say industry specifically, right? Do you want to share any such thoughts? I would love to know, like, hey, how you are like currently, like, how do you like? What are the areas that you are constantly learning currently? Yeah.
Sounds good. I love this. So I'll share two. I'll pick an example from as a product leader, certain skills and problems that I'm working through, and then on the second one, I'll just pick a
Yeah.
sort of like you said, a topic that's top of mind right now. So as a product leader, I think the one that I'm trying to work on right now is breaking down a far away product vision into individual milestones and key results for the team. I'm doing this by either A, trying it again in my day job, but B, just seeing how other product leaders do it, hearing their stories of like what's the big vision that they had in their mind and how did they break it down for their teams. And that's it's different for different technologies, different types of PMs, different types of products. So I find it very interesting when I have conversations there. On the topic side of things, I think generative AI is very big right now in terms of.
So, sorry to cut you, but you consciously go and speak to certain people to understand and learn how they do these things.
Yeah, specifically are around this product vision and breaking it down to product strategy.
Yeah,
So maybe some of my peer
yeah,
product leaders, I'm able to have that
yeah,
conversation with them because it's basically maybe their job of what they've done in the last year, for example, or
yeah,
since you joined this job, what was that big product vision that you had, and how did you get help the team get there, and really seeing
yeah.
how teams do it under different constraints, right? Is really interesting to me
Hmm.
because there's no playbook really for this, right? There's a lot less articles written about
Yeah.
how do you translate something that's complicated and unknown into something smaller. And I think it does come through just learned experiences.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. Um, let's switch gears once again. So John, so I think I've personally not been in a director of product role. I'm a bit curious in terms of like how what was the typical, let's say, like the interview process, right? So for example, you said that you joined Metamap as a director of product, right? So what is the interview process like, for example, for a director of product? Like how did you end up reaching in Metamap? Like, can you explain the whole process on how it happened? Like,
Yeah,
at least maybe like on a high level. We don't have to go into the depth of it, but let's say on a high level, if you could share
yeah. So let's
how was the process like?
yeah
Yeah.
let's talk about how we do it at Metamap. I think I've seen through my interview process there's a number of different schools of thought on this,
Mhm.
but specifically at Metamap, how we do it is
Yeah.
we actually believe in a set of core values that all existing and new employees should have.
Mhm.
This set of core values gets measured during our performance reviews, for example.
Okay.
But we've also taken this all the way into the hiring process as well.
Mm.
So from the 8 initiatives and core values that we have, we translate those into a series of interview questions
Okay.
that specifically measure that value.
Mm.
Now, then the set of questions we might tailor, whether you're a junior product manager, as a manager of product managers, or a director of product,
Mm.
accordingly, as well as the
Mm.
responses. So we were able to calibrate the difficulty and sort of what specifically we're looking for, depending on the
Mm.
role. So I think that's one unique thing we do at
Yeah.
Metamap. So there's a very data-driven
Yeah.
approach to evaluating
Yeah.
candidates and seeing if they're a good fit.
So your point is like you tie the values and then uh, bring it down into, let's say, like break it down into different rounds, right? So what are those rounds like, especially for maybe your role? What was the rounds like, and maybe like for, yeah, maybe we can focus just on your role because SPMs or PMs might be slightly more different, right? So for a director of product, like how was the rounds like? Like was it like similar to, let's say, a PM round where you have starting a recruiter round, then you have a bunch of core rounds, right? That's what the standard is, right? So was it the same there? Like how was it different for you? Like if you can share some more insights on that.
Yeah, I would say there actually are some similarities in the uh, process that I went through versus the process other PMs went through.
Yeah.
Overall, there's about 4 to 5 rounds of interviews. The unique thing is each interview round only focuses on 2 or 3 values. So I think the important part is the focus.
Mm.
There is a sort of a structure and a playbook that each interview round follows
Right.
so that it can get progressively harder as it moves along.
Right.
And again, I mentioned that even though there's a specific value, so let's take collaboration.
Mhm.
The value of collaboration and the questions that we ask for it will be tailored specifically to whether you're a director of product, to a
Okay.
manager of PMs, or just a PM itself.
Mm.
There are slightly different connotations or expectations of even the value of collaboration, for example.
Got it.
At the end of the day, though, it's there's a hiring manager, your boss, making the final decision, and they get sort of the sort of complete picture of you based on how well you map to the attributes, and they're able to make the final call at the end of the process on whether you're proceeding or not.
Hmm. And John, like, how did you end up preparing for this, right? Like, so were you specifically mentioned, hey, like this will be the 5 rounds, and you went and prepared for those specific rounds? Like, what was your preparation mode like? If you can share a bit about that.
Yep. So I think what I mentioned, this is sort of one format of interview questions, and I think a lot of companies follow it. A lot of companies follow the "tell me about a time when you did such and such, right? So I think it just starts from you, really.
Mm.
I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of context that's missing. There's a lot of things to
Yeah. So John, tell me more about like how was the preparation, right? Like what all things you did to prepare for the whole interview process at Metamap.
So when preparing for interviews, I think there's two important aspects. One is your own experience and how you can communicate it. The second is, of course, just practice. So for the first one, which is more the same types of questions MetaMap asks,
Yeah.
a lot of times it's really looking at your resume, looking at your past experiences, and then really just picking out the key achievements or stories or challenges from those moments and really practicing how to communicate it. Again, you've as a person lived through those experiences. It's quite complex, quite complicated, and only you have that full picture of it. And in a short 1 hour interview, where maybe questions are about 10 minutes,
Yeah.
you have to really summarize and be very clear and concise about it. So I did practice sort of the delivery for each story and situation. And I think you have to be aware of like, what are you trying to communicate? Are you trying to show that you are collaborative in this environment or directive in this environment? So I think those two elements really helped me have be really prepared for this interview at Metamap.
John, one question there, since you told like you were prepared for it, right? So, like, how do you typically prepare for this? So, for example, in your case, you have almost 10 years of experience, right? Like, there are a lot of stories to talk about, right? So, like, do you consciously write down these stories somewhere? Right? Do you have this habit of journaling, or like, what is your system of noting down the stories and maybe like bringing up the best stories on the table at the right time? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah. So generally, I start with my resume, actually. So if you were to look at my internal documents, I've got my resume on one hand,
Mm.
and then I've got a full Word doc that sort of maps and breaks down
Okay.
each experience into a number of different sub achievements, sub stories, sub situations.
Oh,
And then
okay.
even within that, I'm able to like prioritize and choose.
Yeah.
So for a specific role, I might choose, hey, these are
Mm.
the 2 or 3 achievements from this experience I want to show off, and I actually create almost like a preparation notes for myself for each interview, each interview process actually.
Yeah.
So I think I find that very helpful because it gives me the right train of thoughts to focus on 1 or 2 stories
Yeah.
and try to communicate that out during the interview session. Versus during an interview, I have to just sort of search through all of my experiences,
Mm.
and that
Interesting.
gets difficult because each experience is different and there's different benefits and attributes about it. So I think it's really about preparing for each interview round and being deliberate about it.
So you told about like how you write that shorthand version of resume where you have the bullet points and then you have, let's say, the longer version where you have elaborated stories, right? And I'm guessing this is mainly for, like, let's say, like in the interview world, this is called like behavioral rounds, right? Like where you are judged on certain values and stuff like that. But is there any other core rounds you have? For example, let's say you are asked about, hey, like how do you solve problem, like the typical RCA questions, or let's say strategy type of questions, right? Like, do you have such kinds of rounds also in this director of product management interview process, or like is it just focused on, let's say, behavioral rounds?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think it's when you said the word strategy, right? I
yeah.
think unless it's a case study
Hmm.
challenge where the interviewer is bringing to you a specific situation and you need to solve it on the spot. I think those, of course, are slightly difficult to prepare for using your past experiences.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, I found that in order to prove and justify anything that you're trying to say, like I'm strategical or I'm organized or I have good time management, you need to have a story to evidence to prove it out,
Hmm.
to take them through and show them exactly how you behave in a situation.
Hmm.
So I actually put high emphasis on these past experiences because those are the only things that are necessarily unique to you, right? The
Yeah.
sort of abstract questions anyone can answer, and oftentimes companies don't answer it because anyone can answer it. They really want to hear about finding evidencing that you've been successful in the past in whatever
Yeah, your stories
your
mainly.
stories. Yeah.
Yeah, what you can bring onto the table, what is your unique stories, that's what they are more inclined towards. Yes, interesting. um, Yeah, I think that gives us a fair idea about the way you prepare and, let's say, the different rounds. Now I think let's switch gears once again, John. I would love to go. So I've been like till now like asking a lot of like paragraph questions to you, like where I was making you talk for a while. Now I think let's stick to a bit more concise, rapid fire questions, right? Um, and this is one of my favorite questions which I ask everybody on the show. So what is your process, right, like which you follow? So you spoke about like how you professionally develop yourself, right? Do you have like a parallel process or a secret to, let's say, improve yourself, right, like for your self development, right? Like let's say, how do you do that, right? Beyond things that is very specific to your career needs, like how do you, let's say, communication, right? That's a very common skill that can be used across the board, right? So do you have any such processes, like which you follow? I would love to hear that.
Yeah. So I do leverage my friends and families as coaches, personal coaches.
Mm,
I think they're uniquely behind me at every like major career decision or personal decision or even just situation.
yeah.
And I'm able to really hear them out for feedback that they might provide, whether it's positive or negative. Or again, like I mentioned, I might ask them, hey, I'm about to do a communications about such and such.
Mhm.
Can we run it by with you? Can we practice it together?
Mm.
So I actually look to them because they're sort of who I am as a person. They really help to shape it. So I take their feedback a lot.
Mm. So mostly your friends and families, what your coaches are, right? Like where they give a ton of feedback to you and you take it very seriously. Mm, interesting. Um, let's have a lighter question. Like, are you a person who watches a lot of movies, or like at least once in a while? Like, do you watch movies? Like, any particular movie you want to share? Like, where which where you have learned something, or let's say even like had fun watching that movie.
Yeah, I'm a big movie lover. I don't have enough time to watch them as much as I'd like. But I think one movie I've seen probably the most, more than a dozen times, was Catch Me If You Can,
Wow.
2002, I believe. Leonardo DiCaprio. It was about a crime thriller with a cop chasing a con artist. And what I liked about it was that the show is just a series of different situations that this con artist ends up being in, and just seeing how he navigates the situation to escape and get out of that situation is super interesting to me. And there's probably a lot of parallels with product management in terms of you're thrown into either a new product or an existing product, and you have to make a quick decision on sort of what do you want to do next to take the product to the next phase. So I think it's related.
That's interesting. Like when you told me about that, like just something came to my mind. So like in industry, there is this saying, right? Like, hey, you need to constantly develop your product muscles, right? Like your product sense, the way you think, you know. So do you draw parallels from, let's say, different things that you do day to day, right? Like in order to develop your product sense, like are you a person who actually consciously try to learn from different things that, let's say, out there, right? Like for example, you're watching a movie, right? Like you kind of relate it to say that, hey, this might be something which I can take back to my career as well, right? Are you a person of that sort, or like what is your thought process around this thinking?
Yeah. So I think product for me isn't just necessarily 9 to 5. I think I'm
Mm-hmm.
always thinking about the product problem that I'm working on.
Mm.
And if I'm able to see any parallels to solve that from a different domain, I'd love to use it. I think uniquely in my career, you've seen that my background is very different, right? Going from hardware, software, consulting, mobile, web. There's a bunch of different experiences that I've lived, and I'm able to take
Yeah.
attributes and decisions and insights from one industry into another industry. And oftentimes it's a unique insight that the team might not have had, and that only I can see because of my experiences. So I do try to use that as one of my superpowers.
Interesting. Any books that you like refer to, John, like specifically, both from, let's say, a product angle and any other self-help or any other genres that you follow to maybe like personally develop and also like a career wise, right? Like any specific recommendations you want to share?
Yep, I'm a big reader,
Mm.
so always have read a lot for growing up. I think these days now it's more audiobooks. I find that
Yeah.
there's just not enough time to make eyes on reading a book. But one book that I read many years ago was the 4 Hour Work Week
Uh-huh.
by Tim Ferriss, and it's a book from the author, really describing about that's ideal world where you have only work, you can only work 4 hours
Yeah.
a week
Yeah.
and be successful. But really, like some of the key concepts were about like outsourcing, right? How can you sort of
Yeah.
take the big problem you have and sort of spread that problem out across other people?
Yeah.
And then there was another concept about mini retirement,
Mm.
that your life isn't just like
Mm.
work hard for 60 years and then retire. You can take these mini retirements throughout your life, and you need to.
Yeah.
And the value of, let's say, taking a year off when you're 30s versus 60, it's so much more value you're going to get because of just what you're able to do. So I also try to take that into my product career as well. Yeah, highly recommend 4 Hour Work Week.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I think as you rightly said, right, like all these concepts that you get from the books, again, right, like you can use it in different ways as well, right? So as you were talking about mini vacations, right? Bringing in that balance is super important, right? Because sometimes that balance is what will help you get another idea, right? So something you do, like let's say you're going for a vacation, right? Like there were a ton of things that you can go back and use in at your work, right? And that's where you get that new perspective as well, right? So good to hear that, John. I think one other question I want to ask is like the same way you are actually taking a lot of ideas from books and stuff like that, right? Like is there any people that you follow avidly, right? Like who are currently living or like even like not with us at the moment, right? Where you take a lot of inspiration from to bring their thoughts and stuff like that, right, to your work and your life and stuff like that.
Yep. There's quite a bit. So I think one thing about product management is a lot of people care deeply about the craft of product management. So
Yeah.
some really senior product leaders are often writing and they're doing podcasts and doing videos. So I really love to hear any of them when I see them. But one leader I follow is Brandon Chu from Shopify.
Mm.
He's a VP of platform product at Shopify, and he's been there for a number of years now.
Yeah.
And he does have a Medium article, and he calls it Black Box of Product Management.
Yeah.
And there's some interesting concepts that he covers, like first principles thinking to minimum viable product manager. I highly recommend his articles and content for any new PM or any PM at the early stage of the career, just trying to build their foundation.
Mm. Interesting. I think, yeah, I think with that, we are mostly coming to the end of the show, John. Thanks a lot for sharing all your wisdom and insights. Once again, it was great catching up with you after a long time and talking to you in this detail, right? So for the viewers, right, like anybody who want to connect with John, the best way to connect with him is on LinkedIn. So I'll be sharing his LinkedIn URL on the description. Once again, thanks, John, for joining the show and sharing all your wisdom. See you. See you.
Take care. Bye bye.
Yeah. See you. See you. Bye. Bye.